My name is Calvin Hartman, and for the past 19 years, I've run a small architectural design firm in Seattle called Axis Build Works. Not flashy, not famous, just quietly excellent, the kind of place that still sends thank you notes after projects wrap. I started it in 2006, right before the housing crash ate half the country's optimism and the other half savings. Lost 2 projects, my first office lease, and a partner, both business and personal, all in the same month. Most people would have folded. I redesigned the model instead. By 2012, we were back on our feet. By 2018, we had 6 employees, 3 awards, and a reputation for doing the kind of work bigger firms forgot how to do. Meticulous, elegant, honest. And that's when Emily Rowan entered the picture. She came in during our first real growth phase. Operations manager, 32. Background in construction logistics. Quiet, efficient, asked the right questions. The kind of person who doesn't just handle things, they anticipate them. I liked her, trusted her, promoted her. That was my mistake. The first red flag was subtle. A vendor invoice that looked a little off. Duplicate charges on line items. Small ones, but oddly frequent. I flagged it for a meeting. Emily smiled and said it was a system sync issue between our new budgeting platform and the accounting software. I already submitted a ticket, she added. Second flag, a contractor who called and asked why his payment had bounced. I checked. Payment showed as processed. I assumed it was his bank. He sounded unconvinced. I let it go. But by the third anomaly, I didn't sleep. That night, I stayed in the office combing through every budget report she'd touched in the last 6 months. I found inconsistencies, but nothing concrete. Just ghosts in the code. That's when I called Javier Torres, freelance forensic consultant, former cybercrimes detective, quiet, direct, and, importantly, owed me a favor. When I told him what I suspected, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Give me a week." He took one look at our contractor payouts and said something that still echoes in my head. "If she did this, Calvin, she's good." Emily Rowan wasn't loud about her ambition. That was part of what made her so effective. She dressed like a project brief, precise, neutral, and impossible to misread. Always in muted tones, everything ironed, everything calculated. Her desk was cleaner than mine, her calendar was color-coded, and her email response time was faster than most people's reflexes. She knew the deadlines before I said them, knew the questions clients would ask before they asked them. When we landed a multi-phase redesign for a historic waterfront district, she handled the logistics like she'd been doing it for decades. The engineers loved her, the contractors respected her, and I, like a fool, trusted her completely. The first complaint came in a voicemail I almost deleted. A subcontractor, one we'd used for years, was following up on an invoice that hadn't cleared. Said he'd submitted it twice. Said Emily told him it was processing through an external account. We don't have external accounts. I called Emily. She didn't even pause. We migrated some vendor payments through a fiscal buffer account this quarter to accommodate the revised net 45s, she said. He must have seen the staging delay. I nodded, pretending I understood. She sounded like QuickBooks had personally confided in her. A week later, another contractor flagged a missing payment, and this time he'd attached screenshots. Our records showed the invoice was paid. His account said otherwise. I brought it up in passing, and Emily sighed like I was asking about printer toner. "I'll handle it." That's what she always said. "I'll handle it." The overages started showing up next. Small things. $328 here, $700 there. Always round numbers, always buried inside larger logistics budgets. I caught one labeled as a structural permit reevaluation for a project that didn't need reevaluation and had no permits due. I pulled the vendor log just to check. Half the invoice trail had routing numbers that traced to shell companies, clean names, blank websites, dummy contact info. I brought it up with Emily. She smiled. "We've been outsourcing clerical overflow," she said. "Independent firms, non-disclosure contracts, it's normal." It wasn't. And I knew then 2 things for certain. 1, she was lying. 2, She was confident I wouldn't prove it. By the third clerical error, I stopped pretending it was a mistake. I wasn't looking for proof at that point. I was looking for clarity. I needed to know how deep it went, and more importantly, how cleanly she'd covered her tracks. That's when I called Javier Torres. Javier and I go back to a case in 2015 when a former site supervisor tried rerouting payroll bonuses into his cousin's bank account. Javier caught it in 4 days and sent over a report so precise it looked like an indictment. He doesn't talk much. Ex-cybercrimes detective, now a private forensic consultant. Wears flannel, carries a fountain pen, and treats every spreadsheet like a murder scene. I called him on a Thursday. "It's probably nothing," I said. He grunted. "It's never nothing." I gave him access to our internal systems, vendor logs, payout approvals, the QuickBooks admin console, everything. I even left a sticky note that read, "Assume I've missed something." He came in the next day, didn't speak much, just nodded and got to work from our unused project planning room. When I brought him coffee, he didn't look up, just muttered, "The routing data's strange. Some of these payments are triangulated." "Triangulated?" I asked. "Made to look like they're flowing through legitimate third parties. But they're actually bouncing between proxy accounts before they land." He tapped the screen. "It's designed to pass basic audits, and whoever did this, they've practiced." I stood there staring at the display. All I could see were colored lines and transaction codes, but Javier saw intention. "What do you want to know first?" he asked. "Where it's going," I said. "And who signed off?" Javier leaned back, folded his arms. "All the transfers are approved by the same user account. Admin level. Matches Emily's login history. IP stamps too. She masked some of them, but not all. Sloppy in the early weeks." "And where's the money landing?" He pointed to a shell company account registered to Rowan West Consulting. The paperwork traced back to a registered agent service out of Boise, Idaho. "And that name?" I asked. "Emily's middle name is West," Javier replied. "She used it to create distance." That's when the quiet part of my mind finally said it out loud. She planned this. By Monday morning, Javier had a working theory. By Tuesday, he had receipts. "It's not just shell routing," he said, sliding a folder across my desk. "It's personal laundering, close-loop funneling, and she's using a borrowed name to do it." The total was $47,113.22, siphoned over the course of 11 months. Not enough to trigger a full audit, but just enough to quietly bleed. The charges were buried inside legitimate budgets. Supply reimbursements, vendor deposits, outsourced CAD contracts. Clean paper trail, slightly inflated, carefully timed. Each transfer's under the 5K threshold, Javier noted. She's done this before. At the center of it all was Avera Design Solutions, an inactive LLC registered to someone named Kyle N. Rowan in Spokane. I didn't have to ask. "Cousin," Javier confirmed, tapping the printout. "Went to trade school with her. Opened the LLC 4 years ago for a landscaping business that folded. Emily reactivated it 3 months before the first transaction hit. Kyle's name is on the registration, but the contact number routes to a Google Voice account, registered under Emily's work email." I leaned back in my chair. It wasn't the theft that stunned me. It was the precision. "She didn't steal from us," I said. "She wrote herself into the budget." Javier nodded. These weren't crimes of opportunity. She forecasted the fiscal windows, staggered the payouts, and matched the defunct vendor's invoice formats to ours. The only reason this was catchable is because one of the old contractors followed up. "What about Kyle?" I asked. "Does he know?" "Hard to say," Javier replied. "Either she's using him as a legal shield, or he's complicit. But he hasn't touched the funds. They're sitting in an Avera sub-account, mostly untouched. That's sloppy or arrogant." He paused, then added, "She wanted time, either to transfer it cleanly, or to weaponize the mess if she got caught." I looked down at the numbers. The same woman I'd praised at staff meetings, defended to auditors, given bonuses to, had spent nearly a year crafting this architecture of deceit beneath my nose. And she wasn't done. She still had her badge, her email, her access, and the confidence of someone who thought she'd planned for every outcome. She hadn't planned for Javier. I called Emily into my office on a Thursday morning. Javier had just finished his summary report. $47,113, 11 months, one cousin's LC. The numbers didn't lie. I wasn't angry, not visibly, just focused, detached. You learn to do that when you've been disappointed enough times. She walked in with her usual calm, slacks, blazer, a ceramic travel mug with Monday's lie printed on the side. Sat across from me like this was a project review. "Emily," I said, "we've discovered financial irregularities in vendor payments you've approved." She blinked, then tilted her head. "What kind of irregularities?" Javier was seated at the side of the room, silent. Legal had advised having a third-party witness. Emily glanced at him briefly, then back to me. "We've traced unauthorized payments to a vendor tied to your personal network," I continued. "Your cousin's LLC." There was a pause, not panic, just polished delay. "That's impossible," she said, setting her mug down. "If something happened in the system, I can walk you through it. We just transitioned billing software, remember? There have been bugs." I slid the printed report toward her. "This isn't a software glitch." She didn't touch the paper. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "I've handled millions in vendor processing. If something slipped through, it was unintentional." "You're being terminated, effective immediately," I replied. "Your access has already been revoked. HR will walk you through the offboarding protocol." Her eyes hardened, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't even deny it. Instead, she smiled, just a fraction. "I'm not signing anything," she said, "and I'd be very careful how you proceed from here." She stood, collected her mug, and walked out without another word. 2 hours later, I got an email from Harrison Cole, an employment attorney out of Portland. His message was concise. "I represent Ms. Emily Rowan, who has been wrongfully terminated from Axis Buildworks in retaliation for raising concerns about toxic management practices and systemic gender bias within your firm. We are preparing to file formal complaints unless this is resolved privately and immediately." I stared at the screen. Emily hadn't just denied wrongdoing. She was flipping the script. Harrison Cole called the next morning. Smooth voice, Ivy League polish. The kind of tone that sounds less like an accusation and more like a negotiation dressed in silk. "Mr. Hartman," he began, "Emily has no desire to escalate this publicly, but you must understand she's devastated. She gave years to your firm and was terminated without cause, without dignity, and frankly, without legal justification." I said nothing. Let him keep talking. "Now," he continued, "if you'd prefer to avoid litigation, we're open to a quiet resolution. A severance equivalent to 2 years' salary, full medical continuation, and an NDA to ensure mutual privacy. This protects your reputation and hers." There it was, the blueprint. I hung up politely, walked down the hall, sat alone in the conference room with the lights off. This wasn't just about a theft anymore. It was about perception, narrative, power. If this went to court, if her version reached headlines, I'd be branded as just another male executive retaliating against a woman who dared to speak up. And Emily was smart enough to build the lie around a truth. She had worked hard. She had earned trust. She was well-liked. And now she was turning that resume into a weapon. For a moment, I considered it. Pay her off? Let it go. Protect the company, the team, the clients who'd never see the wires running beneath the surface. A settlement would make it disappear. No press, no court dates, no questions from investors. We'd eat the cost, update our policies, and move on. But then I looked at the documents Javier had assembled, the routing logs, the staged invoices, the timeline. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated theft wrapped in charm and plausible deniability. If I paid her now, I wouldn't be protecting the company. I'd be selling its integrity. I called Javier. "She's bluffing," I said. "Of course she is," he replied. "But you need to decide. Are you playing defense or offense?" I looked at the folder in my hand. $47,000 of deception, signed off one invoice at a time. Let's move, I said. Quietly, precisely. Javier didn't need to ask what came next. Settle? Javier repeated, leaning back in his chair. No. He didn't say it angrily, just plainly, like a fact he'd confirmed 3 times already. If you settle, he continued, you're telling her she wins. You're telling your team the evidence doesn't matter. You're telling every future thief in this place that all they need is a good lawyer and a PR angle. I nodded slowly. So we go deeper. Off the radar, he said. No noise, no alerts. Just clean digital work. We build a case that doesn't leave questions. Over the next 2 weeks, Javier turned into a quiet ghost inside the firm. He worked late, accessed only archived systems, and requested old server backups from our IT manager without explanation. Emily had been clever. She deleted logs, obfuscated account activity, and routed everything through third-party vendor shells. But she hadn't erased everything. Javier found an approval chain for an invoice batch from 6 months prior. The metadata was intact, and it showed her login credentials were used to override standard payment protocols at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday. He pulled IP logs, one access point pinged from her home Wi-Fi, another from a mobile hotspot registered under her cousin Kyle Rowan's name, the same cousin who owned the dormant LLC she'd reactivated to funnel funds. There's a pattern, Javier said, spreading out the sheets like a post-mortem. Every payment went through at night, after staff hours. She used admin privileges to bypass the dual verification system, then masked the trail by assigning invoice reviews to herself under a different tag. He circled an entry. Look here, she even created a fake user alias, G. Madsen. Cross-check it with the employee directory, it doesn't exist. She'd fabricated an internal reviewer to sign off on her own theft. It's layered, he said, but it's not bulletproof. Can we connect it all? Clearly? Javier nodded. When we're done, not even her lawyer will be able to argue ambiguity. You'll have intent, execution, concealment, and misrepresentation, all tied to her IP and user credentials. And if Kyle keeps sitting still, we might even get a confession from the outside. I stared at the board he'd built. Dates, logins, transfers. It didn't look like an embezzlement scheme anymore. It looked like a blueprint. Javier had a theory. Kyle's not the mastermind, he's the mule. So he baited the hook. He created a dummy architecture firm under a shell LLC with a polished portfolio, website, and a fake contact alias. Then he reached out to Kyle Rowan, inquiring about Ivera Design Solutions and its past work on third-party project processing. Kyle took the meeting. They met at a coffee shop in Spokane. Javier wore a button-down and let Kyle talk. It didn't take long. Yeah, most of our income came through one client, Kyle said, stirring his iced coffee like he was discussing the weather. My cousin Emily hooked it up. She said her firm needed to outsource accounting stuff, regulatory reasons or whatever. Ivera handled compliance? Javier asked. Something like that. I just signed the docs she sent. She set up the accounts and everything. I didn't even have the login till later. And the invoices? She made those too. She said it was just for streamlining, that her company wanted a clean third-party trail, said it looked better on their audits. Javier smiled and ended the meeting 10 minutes later. That recording alone would have cracked the case, but what came next made it airtight. While combing archive Slack backups, Javier's recovery tool pinged on a fragment of a deleted chat. It was from Emily, time-stamped 7 weeks before her termination. She was replying to a friend in a private thread. Honestly, he'll never suspect. I run everything under his nose. He still thinks I'm the one holding it all together. That line sat with me longer than the $47,000 ever did. She wasn't just stealing. She was building an illusion, carefully, calmly, one lie at a time. She knew exactly what she was doing, and worse, she knew exactly who she was doing it to. When Javier handed me the recovered Slack message, he didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That was the moment the case turned. The moment it stopped being a question of if we'd expose her, and became a matter of when. If Emily had just walked away, She might have lived comfortably off the illusion she built. But she pushed one step too far. It happened on a Tuesday night, 1:42 a.m. Pacific. Javier texted me the next morning. She tried to get back in. Our internal systems flagged the breach attempt as an inactive credential access. The login came from an IP address that traced back to her home Wi-Fi in Ballard. She'd used her access credentials, the same ones we deactivated the day she was fired, to attempt access to archived vendor folders and payment histories. But she hadn't accounted for our backup retention protocols. Every access attempt is logged, time-stamped, and geographically tracked. And this one wasn't even subtle. It was a brute attempt, someone looking for files they thought were still there. She went straight for the client folders she was laundering through, Javier said. This isn't curiosity. This is fear. She knows we've got something. I sent the log to legal the same morning. Our attorney, Miriam Tsai, reviewed the stack of evidence we'd assembled, the vendor routing trail, the shell company registration, the cousin's confession, the Slack message, and now the unauthorized access attempt. She closed the file slowly, looked across the table, and said, "This isn't a negotiation anymore. This is a prosecution." We drafted a full civil suit: wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, computer intrusion, misappropriation of company funds, and reputational harm. Miriam coordinated directly with local law enforcement and prepped a formal referral to federal authorities, given the cross-state digital trail and misuse of third-party LLCs. This won't be quiet, she warned, but it'll be clean. I nodded. I wasn't interested in press coverage. I was interested in precedent. Emily hadn't just tried to steal money. She tried to rewrite her exit narrative and bury the truth under legal smoke. But people like Javier know how to clear a room. Slowly, methodically, and with a paper trail that doesn't blink. As Miriam finalized the filings, I sat at my desk and reread the Slack message again. He still thinks I'm the one holding it all together. She was right. I had thought that, but not anymore. We scheduled a meeting with Harrison Cole the following Monday. He walked in with the posture of someone who expected to negotiate, not surrender. Miriam laid out the audit trail calmly. Each document was dated, cross-referenced, and printed in duplicate. She began with the bank logs, then the forged invoice approvals, then the IP trace from Emily's post-termination access attempt. Finally, she played the audio of Kyle Rowan, Emily's cousin, admitting to the false front. When it ended, the room was quiet enough to hear the HVAC system humming. Then came the Slack message. He'll never suspect. I run everything under his nose. Cole didn't argue. He didn't even blink. Just leaned forward, folded his hands, and said, "I'll need to speak with my client privately." "You'll want to do that," Miriam replied, matter of fact. "Because if this proceeds, the next people she hears from will be federal." That part wasn't for show. Javier had already submitted a preliminary report to the local FBI field office. Between the digital impersonation, cross-state laundering through a shell LLC, and unauthorized access to private client data, we weren't looking at a civil issue anymore. We were looking at federal wire fraud. The Bureau's response was faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, I received a call from Special Agent Helena Ortiz, assigned to the Cybercrime and Financial Integrity Unit out of the Seattle Division. "We've reviewed your firm's internal documentation," she said. "The evidence is comprehensive, and given the use of fake identities, digital obfuscation, and credential misuse, this qualifies under multiple federal statutes." "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll open a formal case," she said. "Emily Rowan is now a person of interest in a federal investigation involving cyber fraud, misappropriation of protected client assets, and identity misrepresentation. If Kyle Rowan cooperates, we may offer immunity." I looked at the folder on my desk, the same one that had once been too thin to act on. Now it was thick enough to collapse a defense team. Emily had built a house of cards with dental precision, but she forgot who owns the table, and the feds had just pulled up a chair. It happened quietly, just as it should have. Emily Rowan was arrested at 7:18 a.m. on a drizzling Thursday morning, outside a boutique gym in Fremont. She was wearing a slate gray track jacket, earbuds in, latte in hand. According to the report, she looked surprised, but not uncomposed. The agents didn't shout. No cuffs in the air dramatics, just a calm presentation of a federal warrant and a brief explanation of the charges: wire fraud, identity misrepresentation, unauthorized access to protected systems. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her attorney did the talking soon after. The plea deal came 2 weeks later, short, strategic, and reluctantly accepted. Under the agreement, Emily admitted to orchestrating the false vendor arrangement and misappropriating client funds through fraudulent invoicing. In exchange for cooperation, she avoided trial. No courtroom dramatics. No chance to turn it into a soapbox about workplace culture or bias, or whatever narrative she'd been rehearsing. The terms were clear. 18 months in federal custody, full restitution of the $47,113, to be repaid to Axis Buildworks and impacted client accounts, 5 years of supervised release, permanent disqualification from holding any position involving financial oversight. Kyle Rowan, her cousin, was granted immunity in exchange for full testimony and all communication records. He gave them everything: emails, voice memos, text confirmations. He even forwarded screenshots of Emily explaining how to backdate invoices and set up the routing filters. I was told Emily didn't say a word during most of the plea proceedings. She just listened, expression unreadable. When the judge asked if she understood the consequences of her admission, she reportedly nodded and said, "Yes, I do. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to." There's a strange kind of silence that comes after the truth finishes its work. It doesn't clap. It doesn't gloat. It just sits there, firm, final, undeniable. Javier called me that night. "Clean kill," he said simply. I looked around my office, the same one she used to sit in during budget reviews, asking for delegation authority. She had the keys once, but she used them to break, not build, and the system finally had locked her out. Emily Rowan is now permanently barred from holding any role that involves access to financial systems or client funds. Her name is flagged across multiple compliance databases, and any attempt to work in the finance or operations sector will trip alarms she can't reset. Kyle Rowan testified under oath in full cooperation, his immunity held. He's now working remotely for a logistics firm in Spokane, one that does verify its back-end access logs. For us, it wasn't about the money. We covered the losses. Clients were reimbursed. Insurance handled the mechanics. But trust isn't insured. Trust is earned back, slowly, one truth at a time. I held meetings with every major client, explained what had happened, not with spin, but with clarity. Some were angry, some were disappointed, but most appreciated the transparency. And Axis Buildworks? We didn't fold. We rewrote our vendor protocols, split financial oversight into two-tier approval, added anomaly detection to our systems. We hired a full-time compliance officer, and we made it clear, internally and externally, that silence is never the right answer when something feels wrong. As for Javier, he didn't say much about the case publicly, but within a month of the plea deal, he signed 3 new forensic consulting contracts. Word spreads quickly when you bring down a ghost without making a sound. And me? I've learned that betrayal doesn't always come loud or fast. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it wears a tailored blazer and smiles during team meetings. But when it comes, you face it. You don't flinch, you don't pay it off, and you don't let it rewrite the ending. Because as I've told my team, and myself, many times since, she didn't just betray me, she tried to gaslight the legal system into thinking I was the problem. You don't pay thieves to go away, you expose them, and let the system do the rest. She underestimated quiet men, and she forgot that digital trails don't lie. Axis survived, and so did the truth.